The dinner table was set for two, the candles burning low, but the silence between them was louder than the New York traffic humming outside. Then came the notification sound, a sharp ping that shouldn't have made her flinch, but she did, her eyes darting to the screen before sliding away from mine. It wasn't just a message. It was the first crack in a dam that was about to break, flooding everything we had built with secrets too dark to forgive. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet moments before a storm, where love fractures into something unrecognizable, stay with me. There are truths hidden in these shadows that we haven't uncovered yet, and I'd love for you to see where this path leads. The sound of a zipper sealing shut is distinct. It is a sharp, mechanical hiss that signifies containment, an end to something open. In the quiet of their Brooklyn apartment, the sound was deafening. Ethan stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his hand resting on the frame as if the wood were the only thing keeping him upright. He watched Elena fold a silk blouse, one he had saved up for 3 months to buy her for their anniversary, and place it neatly into the designer luggage that looked out of place on their worn laminate floor. "You're not even going to yell?" Elena asked, not looking up. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of someone who had had this conversation in their head 1,000 times before uttering a single word aloud. "Would it change anything?" Ethan asked. His voice sounded raspy, foreign to his own ears. Elena paused, her hand hovering over a pair of heels. She finally turned to look at him. She was beautiful, in that sharp, polished way that had always intimidated him slightly. But tonight, her eyes were devoid of the warmth he used to find there. They were cold, calculating, assessing him like a bad investment. "No," she said. "It wouldn't. That's the problem, Ethan. Nothing changes with you. The world is moving, evolving, and you're just here, stuck in this apartment, stuck in that dusty library." "We were happy here," Ethan said, though the words felt fragile as he spoke them. "You were happy," Elena corrected. She zipped the second bag. "I was waiting." She walked past him, the wheels of the suitcase rumbling over the threshold. The vibration traveled up through the floorboards and into the soles of Ethan's feet. He didn't move to stop her. There was a sleek black car waiting downstairs. He had seen it from the window, a luxury sedan that cost more than Ethan made in 5 years. Marcus. Ethan didn't need to ask. He knew the type. He had seen the way Elena looked at the men who came into the gallery where she sometimes consulted. Men who wore suits that fit perfectly. Men who didn't look at the price on the menu. "He can give me things you can't, Ethan," she said, stopping at the front door. She didn't turn back to look at the apartment, the photos on the wall, or the life they had, built over 4 years. She only looked at the lock. "I deserve more than just getting by." "Is that what we were doing?" Ethan asked. "Just getting by?" "Look around you," she said, gesturing vaguely at the modest living room, the second-hand bookshelf, the fading rug. "This is mediocrity, and I'm allergic to it." The door clicked shut. The sound was final. Ethan stood in the center of the room for a long time. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. He walked to the window and watched her figure emerge onto the sidewalk. The rear door of the black sedan opened, and she slipped inside without a backward glance. The taillights flared red in the dusk, and then the car merged into the traffic, disappearing toward Manhattan. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up the dim room with a harsh white glow. He picked it up. A text message from Elena. He stared at the words, the pixels burning into his retinas. It wasn't an apology, It wasn't a closure. It was a receipt of her contempt. I'm tired of counting pennies. Enjoy poverty. Ethan let the phone drop onto the sofa. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the heartbreak, and everything to do with the crushing weight of his own perceived worthlessness. He sat down in the dark, the city lights outside mocking him with their promise of gold, unaware that his own blood was boiling with a secret that was about to rewrite everything. The weeks that followed Elena's departure did not pass. They dragged, heavy and gray, like wet wool pulled over Ethan's head. The apartment in Queens, once small but cozy, now felt cavernous. It was a museum of a failed marriage. The empty space on the shoe rack, the vacant side of the bathroom vanity, the silence that greeted him when he turned the key in the lock. It all screamed of absence. Ethan stopped eating properly. Dinner became a rotation of instant noodles and cold toast, eaten standing over the sink. He told himself he was just saving money, adhering to the cruel command Elena had left him with. Enjoy poverty. The words had branded themselves onto the back of his eyelids. Every time he swiped his debit card for a subway fare or a black coffee, he felt a spike of shame, hearing her voice in the mechanical beep of the terminal. He threw himself into his work at the Manhattan Historical Archives. It was a place of dust and silence, a fitting sanctuary for a ghost. He spent long hours in the basement levels, cataloging 19th century ledgers, breathing in the scent of decaying paper and binding glue. His colleagues, a small group of introverted academics, noticed the change. The dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes, the way his clothes hung loosely on his frame. But they were New Yorkers. They knew how to look without seeing, how to respect the privacy of another man's misery. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the walls started to tilt. Ethan was on a ladder, reaching for a box of municipal records from 1922. The air in the archives was always cool, climate-controlled to preserve the paper. But suddenly, Ethan felt a wave of heat wash over him. It started at the base of his neck, and prickly, hot needles spread across his scalp. He paused, gripping the shelf. His heart was hammering against his ribs, an erratic, thumping rhythm that felt too large for his chest. Just stress, he told himself. Just lack of sleep. He closed his eyes, waiting for the vertigo to pass. But the darkness behind his eyelids swirled with angry splashes of red. "Ethan? You all right up there?" The voice came from below, Mrs. Gable, the head archivist. Her voice sounded submerged, as if she were speaking to him from the bottom of a swimming pool. Ethan tried to answer, to say "I'm fine," but his tongue felt thick, like it was made of lead. He opened his eyes, but the rows of books had lost their edges, bleeding into a smear of brown and beige. The poverty Elena mocked wasn't just in his bank account anymore. It was in his blood, a deficiency of spirit, a bankruptcy of will. He tried to step down, but his foot missed the rung. There was no cinematic scream, no dramatic flailing. He simply crumpled. The box of records slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the silent stacks, followed a split second later by the heavier sound of his own body. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but strangely, he didn't feel pain. He felt a profound, overwhelming exhaustion. He stared at the ceiling, watching the fluorescent lights flicker. They hummed a low, electrical note that seemed to synchronize with the fading beat of his heart. He heard Mrs. Gable shouting, the frantic scuffling of shoes on the concrete floor, and then the distant wail of a siren growing louder, cutting through the city's indifferent noise. So this is it, Ethan thought, his vision narrowing to a pinprick of light. She was right. I couldn't even afford to take care of myself. The blackness rose up like a tide, swallowing him whole, carrying him away from the dust, the bills, and the memory of the woman who had left him to drown. The transition from the dusty silence of the archives to the sterile chaos of Mount Sinai was violent. Ethan was no longer a man. He was a collection of failing vitals on a monitor, a problem to be solved by strangers in blue scrubs. He lay pale and still on the gurney, his cheap polyester shirt cut open, exposing the thin chest that barely rose and fell. BP is dropping, 70/40. We need fluids now, a resident barked, his voice tight with the adrenaline of the night shift. A nurse moved with practiced efficiency, sliding a needle into the crook of Ethan's arm. She drew a vial of dark red blood, capped it, and sent it to the lab with a rush sticker. Standard procedure. An exhaustion collapse usually meant dehydration, malnutrition, maybe an underlying heart condition. It should have been routine. 20 minutes. Later, the routine shattered. Dr. Aris Thorne was in his office on the 4th floor, reviewing a grant proposal, when his pager buzzed with a code he hadn't seen in 3 years. Lab critical, type error, unidentifiable. He frowned, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Type error usually meant a contaminated sample or a rookie mistake. But the code came from the automated hematology analyzer, a machine that didn't make mistakes. When Aris arrived at the lab, the technicians were gathered around a monitor, looking more confused than panicked. "What do we have?" Aris asked, stepping into the circle. "Patient Doe, 30-ish male brought in from the archives downtown," the lead technician said, not looking away from the screen. "We tried to cross-match him for a transfusion. The system rejected O negative." Aris paused. "The system rejected the universal donor." "It didn't just reject it, doctor. Look." Aris leaned in. The screen was flashing a soft, persistent amber warning. He tapped the keyboard, pulling up the detailed antigen profile. As he scrolled through the protein markers, his eyes widened. The blood lacked the Rh antigens completely. It lacked the A, the B, and the H antigens. It was a barren landscape, biologically speaking. "Rh null," Aris whispered. "Golden blood." It was the rarest blood type in the world. Fewer than 50 people on the planet were confirmed to have it. A drop of this blood was worth its weight in diamonds to the scientific community. Yet it belonged to a man wearing a fraying undershirt and shoes with holes in the soles. "Get the frozen reserves," Aris ordered, his voice dropping an octave. "We have a small cache in the cryogenic unit for extreme cases. Do not use standard supply. You'll kill him." "There's something else," the technician said, hesitating. "When we ran the full genetic sequencing, standard for Rh null cases to check for hereditary anemia, the database froze." "Froze?" "It locked us out. It threw up a firewall I've never seen." Aris pushed the technician aside gently and took control of the terminal. He bypassed the standard interface, using his clearance as chief of hematology. He queried the specific genetic sequence that had triggered the lock. The screen blinked, the amber warning turning to a stark, aggressive crimson. "Restricted sequence, Sterling Vanderbilt Trust, alert level, Alpha, do not discharge. Contact legal counsel immediately." Aris stared at the screen. The air in the lab seemed to vanish. The Sterling family? The pharmaceutical dynasty that practically owned half the medical patents in the hospital? Julian Sterling, the patriarch, was a ghost story in the city. A recluse billionaire dying in a penthouse overlooking the park, rumored to have no heir. Aris looked through the glass partition at the unconscious man in the trauma bay. He looked at the sharp line of Ethan's jaw, the specific arch of his brow, features that suddenly looked familiar in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. "Doctor?" the technician asked nervously. "What do we do? Do we treat him?" Aris straightened up, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the phone on the wall. He wasn't calling the pharmacy. He was dialing a number that he had been given when he took the job, a number he was told he would likely never use. "Stabilize him with saline and the cryoblood," Aris said, his voice steel. "And put a security detail on his door. No one goes in or out. No family, no press." "Who is he?" Aris held the receiver to his ear, listening to the first ring. "He's not a librarian." Ethan woke up to the smell of fresh lilies and the hum of silence. It wasn't the antiseptic, bleach-heavy silence of a public ward, nor the dusty silence of his apartment. This was an expensive silence, heavy, insulated, and curated. He opened his eyes, expecting the water-stained ceiling of his bedroom in Queens. Instead, he saw recessed lighting and crown molding. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, anchored by the lingering effects of sedation. He blinked, bringing the room into focus. It looked less like a hospital and more like a hotel suite in a magazine he couldn't afford to read. There were floor-to-ceiling windows draped in heavy velvet, and beyond them, the sprawling green geometry of Central Park lay beneath the morning sun. "He's awake." The voice was dry and cracked, like parchment being crinkled. Ethan turned his head. Sitting in a leather wingback chair by the window was an old man. He was skeletal, his skin translucent and spotted with age, an oxygen cannula running across his cheeks like clear vines, but his eyes, pale, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent, were alive. Behind him stood 3 men in charcoal suits, standing with the rigid posture of expensive security or very expensive lawyers. "Where am I?" Ethan rasped. He reached for the water pitcher on the bedside table, but one of the suits moved instantly, pouring a glass and placing it in his hand before he could fully extend his arm. "Mount Sinai, the Sterling Wing," the old man said. He didn't stand. He simply watched Ethan with an intensity that made the air feel thin. "You gave the staff quite a scare, Mr. Caldwell. Or should I say, Mr. Sterling." Ethan froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. "My name is Ethan Caldwell. I work at the city archives. If this is about the bill, I have insurance. It's not great. But it is not about the bill," the old man interrupted. He gestured with a trembling hand to the man on his right. The lawyer stepped forward, placing a thick file on the rolling table over Ethan's lap. "Mr. Caldwell, my name is Arthur Vance, head of legal counsel for Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Yesterday, your blood work triggered a genetic flag that has been dormant in the global medical database for 32 years. Ethan looked down at the file. The first page was a copy of his birth certificate, the one he kept in a shoebox under his bed. But next to it was another document, yellowed and stamped with a seal he didn't recognize. It bore a footprint of an infant and a different name, Alexander Julian Sterling. "I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "My parents, they died in a car crash when I was 4. I was raised in foster care." "Your guardians died in a crash," the old man corrected softly. "They were paid to keep you hidden, to keep you safe." Ethan looked at the old man, really looked at him. He saw the high forehead, the set of the jaw, the shape of the hands resting on the cane. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. The resemblance wasn't just physical, it was visceral. "Safe from what?" Ethan asked. From the same people who wanted me dead, Julian Sterling said. A cough rattled his thin chest, and he took a moment to breathe. I had enemies, Ethan. Too many. When you were born, the threats were specific. We sent you away to a simpler life until the danger passed. But the network broke. The people watching you disappeared. We lost you. Ethan felt a cold numbness spread through his limbs. You lost me? He repeated, a bitter laugh bubbling up in his throat. I have been living in Queens, eating instant noodles and counting subway tokens. My wife left me 3 weeks ago because I couldn't afford a vacation. She called me a failure. She told me to enjoy my poverty. He looked around the opulent room, at the view of the city that was now ostensibly his. The irony was so sharp, it felt like a physical blow. The poverty that had destroyed his marriage, the mediocrity Elena had despised, it was all a clerical error, a mistake. She left you for lack of money? Julian asked. His eyes narrowed, and for a second, the predator within the frail body surfaced. She left me for a millionaire, Ethan said, the words tasting like ash. A man named Marcus Thorne. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, shifted slightly. Marcus Thorne? The software developer? He is currently leveraging his assets to secure a loan from our private banking division. He is insignificant. Julian leaned forward, the oxygen tubes trembling. He is dust, the old man hissed. And you, my son, are the mountain. Ethan looked at his hands, the hands of an archivist, stained with ink and dry from paper dust. They were shaking. The reality of it crashed down on him. He wasn't just a man who had been dumped. He was the lost heir to an empire that could buy and sell Marcus Thorne a dozen times over before breakfast. What do you want from me? Ethan asked. I am dying, Alexander, Julian said, using the name that felt like a stranger's coat. The wolves are circling the gates, waiting for me to fall so they can tear this family apart. I need you to take your place. I need you to be who you were born to be. Ethan looked out the window again. Somewhere out there, Elena was waking up in Marcus's bed, thinking she had won the lottery. She had no idea that the winning ticket had been in her pocket the entire time, and she had thrown it away. Okay, Ethan said, the single word heavy with the death of his old life. Tell me what I have to do. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the Fifth Avenue penthouse did not look like Ethan Caldwell. Ethan Caldwell wore cardigans that had been washed too many times and checked the price of appetizers before ordering. The man in the mirror wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than a Honda Civic, cut so precisely it seemed to correct his posture, forcing his spine straight and his chin up. The shoulders are perfect, sir, the tailor murmured, stepping back with a pincushion strapped to his wrist. It changes the way you occupy the room. It feels like armor, Ethan said, adjusting the cuff. In your position, Mr. Sterling, that is exactly what it is, Arthur Vance said from the sofa, where he was reviewing a stack of documents on an iPad. Ethan turned from the mirror. It had been 3 weeks since the hospital. 3 weeks of legal briefings, security protocols, and a crash course in corporate governance that would have broken a weaker man. But Ethan hadn't broken. The grief over Elena hadn't vanished, but it had calcified, hardening into a cold, dense fuel that kept him awake during the 18-hour days. He walked over to the desk, a massive slab of mahogany that had belonged to Julian. He sat down, the leather chair accepting him not as a guest, but as an owner. The board meeting is set for Friday, Ethan said, his voice dropping into the lower, flatter register he had unconsciously adopted. They're expecting a librarian. They're expecting a pushover. Let them. Vance said without looking up. Surprise is our greatest asset. Speaking of assets, we received the updated financials on the Thorne acquisition proposal. Ethan went still. He reached for the black folder Vance had slid across the mahogany. Marcus Thorne. The name that had once made his stomach turn with jealousy now just looked like a liability on a spreadsheet. He opened the file. It was an autopsy of a failing business. Marcus lived a loud life. Fast cars, faster boats, and high-profile parties. But the numbers whispered a different story. His tech startup was bleeding cash. He was over-leveraged, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And the bank he was currently petitioning for a massive lifeline loan was a subsidiary of Sterling Capital. He doesn't know, does he? Ethan asked, tracing the line of debt with his finger. That you are the majority shareholder of the bank he's begging? Vance allowed a rare, thin smile. No. To the public, you are still an anonymous recluse. To Mr. Thorne, Julian Sterling is a dying old man who rubber stamps loans. He expects approval by Monday. Ethan looked at the photo clipped to the file. It was a paparazzi shot of Marcus and Elena leaving a club in Chelsea. Elena was laughing, her head thrown back, diamonds glittering at her throat. She looked happy, or at least, she looked expensive. A month ago, this photo would have destroyed him. He would have analyzed her smile, wondering if she ever laughed like that with him. Now, he just saw the desperation in the tight grip Marcus had on her waist, the forced brightness of the scene. He saw two people dancing on a trapdoor. Deny the loan, Ethan said. Vance paused. Sir, if we deny it outright, he might go to a competitor. If we want to crush him, we should string him along. Let him think the money is coming. Let him spend money he doesn't have. Ethan looked back at the reflection in the window. The city lights were coming on, a grid of gold and ambition. He thought about the text message. Enjoy poverty. You're right, Ethan said, closing the folder. Approve a provisional review. Ask for more collateral. Make him sweat. Make him leverage everything he owns, his house, his cars, his stock options. I want him to feel safe right up until the moment the floor drops out. Understood, Vance said, making a note. And there is one more thing. The Met Gala is next week. The Sterling family has a standing table. Usually it sits empty. But if you want to make your debut... Ethan stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the streets where he used to walk with his head down, afraid of making eye contact with a world he couldn't afford. Book it, Ethan said. And make sure we're seated near the center. I'm done hiding. He wasn't Ethan Caldwell anymore. Ethan Caldwell was a ghost. Alexander Sterling was alive, and he was hungry. The morning light in Marcus Thorne's penthouse was not warm. It was aggressive. It bounced off the chrome surfaces and white marble countertops, creating a glare that made Elena squint over her untouched avocado toast. I don't care what the compliance officer said. Marcus was pacing the living room, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He was shouting into his phone. The charm he had used to woo Elena completely evaporated, replaced by the jagged edge of a man watching his net worth bleed out. The collateral is there. It's a temporary liquidity issue. Fix it, or you're fired. He ended the call and threw the phone onto the sofa. It bounced dangerously close to Elena, but she didn't flinch. She had learned in the last 3 weeks that flinching only drew his attention, and his attention was lately sharp and critical. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. It's fine, Marcus snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way that looked frantic rather than roguish. Just red tape. The bank is dragging its feet on the refinancing. It's like someone upstairs has it out for me. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and didn't offer her one. It was a small thing, a microscopic slight, but it made Elena's chest ache with a sudden, sharp memory of Ethan. Ethan, who used to wake up 10 minutes early just to make sure her coffee was brewed, exactly how she liked it before she opened her eyes. Ethan, who listened. "I need to go to the gallery today," Elena said, trying to fill the silence. "Take an Uber," Marcus said, already looking at his smartwatch. "I need the driver, and don't put it on the black card. Use your personal account. We're tightening the belt until this loan clears." Elena stared at him. The man who had promised her the world was now rationing her transportation. "Tightening the belt? Marcus, you just bought a $40,000 watch last week." "That's an asset, Elena. God, you don't understand how this works, do you?" He looked at her with a sneer that was becoming his default expression. "You're just here to look pretty. Let me handle the money." He grabbed his blazer and stormed out, the heavy front door slamming with a force that rattled the expensive art on the walls. Elena sat alone in the silence of the multi-million-dollar cage she had chosen. She looked around the room. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly empty of love. She had texted Ethan to enjoy poverty, but sitting here surrounded by designer furniture and fear, she felt poorer than she ever had in their cramped Queens apartment. She picked up her tablet to distract herself, scrolling through the social media feeds of the New York elite, the world she had been so desperate to join. The headlines were buzzing with the upcoming Met Gala. Every fashion blog and society column was speculating about the guest list. Top story, the return of the Sterlings. Elena paused. The Sterling family was old money, mythical money. They rarely made headlines. She tapped the article, bored. After decades of silence, the Sterling dynasty has a new face. Julian Sterling's long-lost son and sole heir is set to take the helm of the empire. Sources say he has been living in obscurity in New York City, hiding in plain sight. Her eyes skimmed the text, uninterested, until she reached the photo. It was a candid shot, taken through the window of a bespoke tailor shop on Fifth Avenue. The man in the photo was being fitted for a tuxedo. He was standing in profile, his jawline sharp, his posture commanding. He looked powerful. He looked devastatingly handsome. Elena's heart stopped. The tablet slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the marble counter. She knew that jawline. She knew the scar just above the eyebrow, barely visible in the grain of the photo. She knew the hands that were adjusting the cuff of a suit that cost more than her father's house. "No," she whispered. The sound strangled in her throat. "It's not possible." She picked up the tablet again, her hands shaking violently, and zoomed in. The eyes. There was a hardness in them she had never seen, a cold steel that replaced the gentle warmth she had taken for granted. But it was him. It was Ethan. The caption under the photo read, "Alexander Sterling, formerly known as Ethan Caldwell, prepares for his society debut." The room seemed to tilt. The air was sucked out of her lungs, the poverty she had mocked, the mediocrity she had fled. It was a masquerade. She hadn't left a loser. She had walked away from a king, and in doing so, she had handed him the crown. The flashbulbs outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art were not just lights. They were physical assaults, a rhythmic popping that turned the night into a strobe-lit dream. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into a canyon of flowers and gold-leafed tables, humming with the low, expensive murmur of people who owned the skyline. Elena stood near the entrance to the Temple of Dender, clutching a glass of champagne she was too nauseous to drink. Marcus had abandoned her 10 minutes ago to corner a hedge fund manager near the bar, leaving her adrift in a sea of silk and jewels. She felt small. The dress she wore, a rental she had fought Marcus to pay for, felt cheap compared to the haute couture flowing around her. Then the room shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a gravitational pull. Heads turned, conversations fractured and died. A hush swept through the hall, starting at the grand staircase and rippling outward. Ethan descended. He was flanked by Arthur Vance and a striking woman in emerald velvet, a French diplomat's daughter, if the gossip blogs were correct. But no one was looking at them. They were looking at him. He moved with a languid, predatory grace that belonged to Alexander Sterling, not the man who used to apologize for taking up too much space on the subway. His tuxedo was midnight blue, cutting a sharp silhouette against the ancient stone of the temple. Elena's breath hitched. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She navigated through the crowd, ignoring the dirty looks as she pushed past a senator and a film producer. She had to talk to him. She had to explain. If he just looked at her, if he just saw her eyes, he would remember the 4 years of Sunday mornings and shared secrets. He would remember that she was Elena. She intercepted him near the fountain. "Ethan," she breathed, the name sounding incredibly loud in the pocket of silence surrounding him. He stopped. The crowd nearby pretended to look away while listening intently. He turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. His eyes swept over her face, not with longing, not even with hatred, but with a polite, distant curiosity one might offer a piece of abstract art they didn't quite understand. "I believe you have the wrong person," he said. His voice was smooth, polished, stripped of the Queen's accent she used to tease him about. "I am Alexander Sterling." "Stop it," she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out, her fingers grazing the sleeve of his jacket. He didn't flinch, but he didn't lean into the touch either. He simply looked at her hand until she retracted it, burning with shame. "It's me, Ethan. It's Elena, please. I saw the news. I didn't know." "You didn't know about the money," he corrected. "That is what you mean, isn't it?" "No," she lied, tears pricking her eyes. "I didn't know who you were. We were married, Ethan. Doesn't that mean anything?" "We were married to a budget," he said, his gaze drifting over her shoulder to where Marcus was watching them, pale and sweating, from across the room. "And when the budget ran out, so did the marriage. You were very clear, Elena. You wanted a man who could give you the world." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. For a second she thought he might kiss her. The scent of him, sandalwood and cold rain, was intoxicating. "You told me to enjoy poverty," he said softly, so only she could hear. "And I have found that poverty is a state of mind, Elena. It is the state of needing things you cannot have. And right now, standing in this room, wearing a dress that doesn't fit you, with a man who is drowning in debt, you are the poorest person here." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. It was a physical blow, precise and surgical. "Ethan, please," she choked out. "I made a mistake. I was scared. We can fix this. I still love you." He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a terrifying, hollow expression. "You don't love me," he said. "You love the idea of safety, and I am afraid I am no longer safe, Elena. I am dangerous." He turned away from her, signaling to the French diplomat with a subtle nod. "Enjoy the evening," he threw back over his shoulder, as casually as if he were discarding a used napkin. "The champagne is excellent. I own the vineyard." He walked away, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea, leaving Elena standing alone by the fountain, the spray of water misting her face like cold tears, while Marcus watched from the shadows, too afraid to approach the man who now held the deed to his life. The collapse of Marcus Thorne did not happen with a bang, but with the quiet shuffle of legal papers. 2 days after the gala, the provisional loan from Sterling Capital was officially denied. The denial triggered a cascade of margin calls that Marcus had no liquidity to meet. By Wednesday morning, the foreclosure notice was taped to the door of the penthouse, and the leased luxury sedan was being hooked up to a tow truck. Elena watched from the lobby window, her suitcases packed next to her. It was a dark, poetic symmetry. Just weeks ago, she had packed these same bags to leave a man she thought was worthless. Now, she was leaving a man who actually was. Marcus was upstairs, screaming at his lawyers, blaming the market, blaming the bank, blaming everyone but himself. Elena didn't wait to hear the end of the argument. She simply walked out. She had nowhere to go. Her credit cards, linked to Marcus's accounts, were declined. Her pride, which had been her armor, was shattered. She found herself standing outside the Sterling Tower in Midtown. The building was a monolith of glass and steel, piercing the gray sky. It began to rain, a cold, biting drizzle that soaked through her coat. She stood there for 2 hours, watching the revolving doors spin, waiting for a ghost. When Ethan finally emerged, the world seemed to slow down. He walked out surrounded by a phalanx of security and assistants. He was talking to Arthur Vance, gesturing at a file, looking focused and unburdened. He looked like a man who had the weight of the world on his shoulders, but had found the strength to carry it. "Ethan!" The name tore from her throat, desperate and shrill. The security detail moved to intercept her immediately, a wall of black suits blocking her path. Ethan stopped. He raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. He looked at her. Elena stepped forward, shivering. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, her mascara running. She knew how she looked. She looked like a ruin. "I left him," she said, her voice trembling. "I left Marcus. You were right, Ethan. It was all fake. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." Ethan stood under the dry sanctuary of the building's overhang. He didn't offer her his umbrella. "You didn't make a mistake, Elena. You made a calculation. The math just didn't work out." "I missed you," she sobbed, reaching for his hand again, but stopping short when he didn't move. "I missed us. Can't we just talk? Somewhere private? I know I hurt you, but I can make it up to you. I can be the wife you need now." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, the anger was gone. The resentment was gone. There was only a vast, quiet distance between them, a distance that no amount of money could bridge. "You can't be that wife," Ethan said gently, "because that Ethan doesn't exist anymore. You killed him the night you walked out. You taught him that loyalty has a price tag. You taught him that love is conditional." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and turned it around to show her. It was the screenshot of her final text to him, the pixels that had haunted his nightmares for weeks. "Enjoy poverty." "I realized something," Ethan said, looking from the screen to her eyes. "You weren't talking about money. You were talking about a life without integrity, a life without loyalty." He put the phone away. "I am a billionaire now, Elena. I can buy this city. But you are the one who is truly empty. You have no home, no partner, and no truth." "Ethan, please," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know," Ethan said, turning his back on her. "But I suggest you start by learning how to survive on your own. It builds character." He stepped into the waiting car. The heavy door thudded shut, sealing him inside the warm, leather-scented interior. As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of traffic, Ethan didn't look back. He didn't watch her shrinking figure in the rearview mirror. He opened his laptop. He had a board meeting in 20 minutes, a charity initiative to approve, and a legacy to build. The rain streaked the window, washing away the dirt of the city, washing away the past. For the first time in his life, he was rich, not because of the bank account, but because he finally knew what he was worth.